Hello and welcome to Invest PharmaTech. My name is Orunduti Parmar and I'm the editor-in-chief of MedCity News. The book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus might well have been written about big pharma and the digital health startup world. Attempts at collaboration between these two entities have largely failed. Think Proteus Digital Health and Otsuka Pharmaceuticals integrated sensor and depression pill that ended in failure and was pulled from the market. Think Novartis pulling out of a commercialization agreement with Pear Therapeutics to develop a prescription app. But the pandemic has shown how all organizations need to work together to adopt digital approaches. So today we have assembled an expert panel to discuss how pharma and digital can become a match made in heaven. So our panelists are Naomi Fried with Pharmstars, Jessica Federer with Boston Millennia Partners, Charles Fisher with Unlearn.AI, Joel Krikston with Merck Global Health Innovation Fund, and Jim Parshall with Eli Lilly and Company. Naomi Fried is the founder and CEO of Pharmstars, the first farm-focused accelerator for digital health startups. She is also a managing partner and co-founder at Ambit Health Ventures, a VC fund focused on early-stage digital health investments. Previously, Naomi was the CEO of the boutique advisory firm Health Innovation Strategies and was the first VP of Innovation and External Partnerships at Biogen, where she developed the firm's innovation beyond the molecule strategy. Prior to that, she was the first Chief Innovation Officer at Boston Children's Hospital, where she built and led a team to promote digital health and clinical innovation. Naomi is on the board of Waveley Diagnostics and has served on the board of directors of the American Telemedicine Association and was a member of the Governor of Massachusetts Innovation Council. Naomi received her PhD in materials science from MIT and her BS in chemistry from the University of California, Berkeley. Welcome to you, Naomi. Next up is Jessica Federer. She's a partner at Boston Millennia, investing in high-impact tech-enabled companies transforming life science research and healthcare globally. Previously, Jessica was the Chief Digital Officer at Bayer AG, leading the global digital transformation for the life sciences leader across consumer health, pharmaceuticals, animal health, and agriculture. There, she was recognized as one of the top 100 global CDOs and a leading health tech influencer. Jessica served on the United Nations Empowering Development Advisory Board for the Agency for Information and Communications Technology. She began her public health career as an analyst at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Jessica earned a Bachelor of Science from the George Washington University and a Master of Public Health from Yale. Welcome to you, Jessica. Charles Fisher is the founder and CEO of Unlearn.AI. He's a scientist with interests at the intersection of physics, machine learning, and computational biology. Previously, Charles worked as a machine learning engineer at Leap Motion and a computational biologist at Pfizer. He was a Philippe Meyer Fellow in Theoretical Physics at École Normale Supérieure in Paris, France, and a postdoctoral scientist in biophysics at Boston University. Charles holds a PhD in biophysics from Harvard University and a BS in biophysics from the University of Michigan. Welcome to you, Charles. Joel Krikston is Managing Director of Venture Investments and Head of Strategic Innovation Alliances at Merck Global Health Innovation Fund. He's focused on identifying new investment opportunities in precision medicine, artificial intelligence, population health, real-world evidence, and health equity with a focus on oncology, vaccines, and infectious disease. He currently serves on the boards of Arcadia Healthcare Solutions, Cancer IQ, and Infectious Disease Connect, and is a board observer to Verana Health, GNS Healthcare, and RX Vantage. Joel also manages Merck's investment in Unitas and serves as the fund's representative to Health Tech Capital. Joel has an MBA with honors from the Stern School of Business at NYU and completed his bachelor's degree in finance and international business at Fairfield University. Joel was recognized as a rising star by Global Corporate Venturing in 2017. And last but not least, we have Jim Parshall, Senior Director of Connected Health and Device External Innovation at Eli Lilly and Company. Since joining Lilly in 1999, Jim has held various technical and leadership positions in manufacturing, IT, and product development. In each of his roles, he has championed disruptive innovation to create significant business impact within the 146-year-old pharmaceutical company. Jim assumed his current role in 2019 and is responsible for identifying, evaluating, and executing external digital health opportunities to support Lilly's key therapeutic areas. Prior to his external innovation role, Jim was Lilly's Director of Software Device Solutions, where he recruited and led a talented, energized team that was passionate about leveraging digital health to improve patient outcomes. Jim earned a BS in electrical engineering from Kettering University and an MS in electrical engineering from Purdue University. Before joining Lilly, Jim worked as a lead process and automation engineer at Ben & Jerry's Homemade, where he learned that eating one's own mistakes could actually taste good. Welcome to you, Jim. Before I turn it back to our matchmaker for this session, Naomi, I wanted to ask the audience to feel free to ask questions in the chat, and then Naomi will tackle them as she sees or at the end of the chat. So over to you, Naomi, and the panel.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome everyone. Again, I'm Naomi Freed, founder and CEO of Pharmstars, the digital health accelerator for pharma-focused startups. It is my pleasure to welcome you all today to our panel on pharma and tech, how to make a match made in heaven. Thank you, Arundhati and MedCity, for the opportunity to join your program. It's really a pleasure to be here. And we have a wonderful panel with amazing experiences you've just heard with us today. And I think they're going to share some really excellent insights on the how and why pharma and digital health should be the best of partners. This topic is near and dear to my heart. I've been working with digital health startups all of my career and in pharma the past 7 years. When I was advising large pharma firms on their digital health strategy, it became apparent to me that it's not easy for big pharma and digital health tech startups to work together. Each group would benefit tremendously from partnership. Deals generally were hard to do. They were done extremely slowly, and they were few and far between. Now, clearly, pharma could benefit from the rapid and cutting innovation that digital health startups are developing to bring greater beyond the molecule value to their patients and to help them develop new drugs more quickly. And of course, startups could benefit from working with pharma because of pharma's tremendous experience working with the regulatory agencies, from their amazing sales channels, and of course, from their extensive resources. Yet these two groups often seem practically incompatible. The cause of this apparent incompatibility is what I call the Pharma Startup Gap. And the Pharma Startup Gap is the divergent way that pharma and digital health startups operate. There are many things that contribute to the Pharma Startup Gap, including differences in language, culture, appetite for risk, orientation toward regulation, speed and timing, and all sorts of expectations. Today, our esteemed panel will discuss the Pharma Startup Gap and what can be done about it. We have an outstanding and diverse panel to explore this topic, including Jim, who's a pharma digital health champion at Eli Lilly, Jessica, who's a VC that invests in digital health companies, Joel, who works in a pharma VC fund, and Charles, who's the CEO of a pharma-focused digital health company. So welcome, everyone. And as Arundhati said, we want to encourage the audience to begin thinking of their questions, and we hope to reserve maybe 10 or 15 minutes at the end of today's panel to answer any questions posted in the chat. So Joel, Charles, Jessica, Jim, let's get started. So I want to frame our conversation today first by starting to offer a working definition of digital health, because it can be a broad and often confusing term. So I think digital health fundamentally leverages software, whether it's apps, computer programs, digital games, and or hardware such as devices, wearables, sensors, robots, to deliver care and information to patients and providers that can be more convenient, more cost-effective, and personalized. Digital health actually has the potential to improve outcomes, decrease costs, and even improve efficiency, and sometimes deliver care and information in entirely new ways. Digital health solutions include digiceuticals, often called digital therapies, a variety of types of clinical grade actionable digital information, medication adherence solutions, and of course, virtual care. So I want to now turn to our panel and ask you each to comment on why digital health is becoming so important to pharma. And maybe we'll start with you, Joel.
Sure, thanks. Nice to be here. Nice to see everyone, at least virtually. It's a question I think we sort of joke about a little bit, which is if you imagined a business school case study where someone presented you with $1 trillion industry and told you that they didn't have a service department, and then asked you to get to work trying to think about how to fix that problem. That's a little bit of the bind, I think, that we find ourselves in. We have a highly regulated set of circumstances around how we interact with our customers. There are very well publicized groups that stand between an industry like the pharmaceutical industry and their ultimate end user that play specific roles. However, that creates additional distance between ourselves and our end users. So it's really an interesting question in terms of why it's important to us, because I think we're always trying to figure out how to have a better relationship, deliver and contribute more to outcomes, to really understand how our products are being used in the real world. And yet in reality, we're very limited in terms of the role that we can play, particularly when it comes to influencing other variables that ultimately impact outcomes beyond just the biological or the chemical entity. So as data in healthcare has become commoditized, as all of these new care models have emerged, I think there's a big opportunity for us as pharma to get closer to our customers, whether they're healthcare providers or our patients.
Love that, Joel. Digital health's a way for big pharma to get closer to their customers and patients. Jessica, do you want to weigh in on why digital health is becoming so important to pharma?
Sure. I think it's because companies want to stay alive. They want to stay in business. Let's just, anything that is technology enabled in improving healthcare research or healthcare delivery falls under the broad umbrella of digital health right now. And as a company, as an industry that exists on bringing innovation in a sustainable, process-driven, heavily regulated environment to market, these tech-enabled solutions are just a necessity for these companies to stay alive.
So a do or die for pharma, huh?
Pretty much.
Well, let's hear from Jim, who's working busily inside a pharma firm. What's your perspective, Jim?
Well, Joel and Jessica both said very good things. And I think there's commercial applications. We talked about how to new channels of engagement between patients and the healthcare providers that pharma can help with, self-management solutions pharma can help with. There's also, of course, a lot of digital capabilities. Naomi, I believe you mentioned yourself, how to improve clinical research efforts with these type of tools. I think it's important, though, to recognize that pharma understands the promise of digital health. Pharma, what it considers its role to be or what its scope is in digital health is going to vary from company to company. And how much the company actually decides to do in-house versus partner is going to vary from company to company. And, I like to think of it, there's a little bit of an innovator's dilemma going on out there. And the pharma companies with the most promising portfolios and pipelines may be the ones least interested at this particular moment in exploring a lot of digital health options. So not that I disagree with Jessica, what she said, do or die. I think the ones that are closer to dying are more apt to do it.
Love it. Great. Charles, where do you come in on this discussion?
Well, I think that it is important for pharma, but it's for every industry, right? There's one piece of technology that gets twice as fast every 2 years, and those are computers. And so any industry that isn't taking advantage of the fact that every 2 years it gets twice as good is really missing the boat on a huge enabler, right? We're not getting twice as good at chemistry every 2 years. We're not getting twice as good at understanding biology every 2 years, but computers do get that. They do that. And then, you think about, combine that computing power with, what is just happening with the explosion of data. So you have an opportunity here where there is a technology, an enabling technology that if people adopt it, has the potential to transform this and every industry. And I think that the challenge is for pharma is that the people who work in pharma do not come from a computational background by and large. And so they don't appreciate this fact that computers are getting twice as fast every 2 years. They don't know how to take advantage of it. And so I think that the partnership between what I would call computation first companies and pharma, which is like biology first companies, it's going to be important really in driving the adoption of these methods and the ability for pharma companies to take advantage of these doubling of computers speed every 2 years.
Yeah, it's a great point. Innovation is happening. Digital computational innovations are certainly driving change. I think one of the issues is really that digital technology is not a core competency for big pharma, and that's why it makes a lot of sense to look outside and to try to partner, but that's not always something recognized. So let's go back to the idea of sort of this pharma startup gap and explore a bit more about why it's historically been hard for pharma and digital health startups to collaborate. And what are the challenges, the biggest impediments? Maybe Charles, as someone who's obviously been working with pharma companies, you can lead off and answer this question.
Well, I think that I would think of it as being kind of like two areas that are important for startups to demonstrate to pharma. The first one is value. You have to actually demonstrate value to the pharma company. Frankly, not ultimately. There's a lot of digital health company. A lot of companies, not Unlearn. Unlearn, we are not a patient-focused company, right? So what we do helps pharma companies run faster clinical trials. We don't actually deliver any care or anything like that to patients themselves. We just help pharma companies run faster trials. And so the value to the pharma company is immediately apparent. Like we can tell you exactly, like your trial will be this much faster and you'll be able to save this much money. And so that makes it a lot easier. I think that if you're, say, developing a digital therapeutic, what's the value the pharma company is getting out of using that digital therapeutic? That's harder to translate, right? It might be valuable to the patients, but what's the value to the partner? And then the other thing is just regulatory. I mean, you have to be able to navigate the regulators yourself as a startup. If you are relying on that partnership, it's sort of this chicken and egg problem, because the pharma companies say, well, we can help you navigate the regulators, but in order to get the partnerships, you have to have already navigated the regulators. So I think it's really important for every startup to demonstrate value to the pharma company and figure out how to navigate the regulatory landscape themselves.
Well, Charles, that's what you have behind you, right? That's the value and the navigating regulators equations, right? Behind you.
Right. Yeah. This is natural gradient descent of some things.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But I think aside from I think that the underlying aspects of the technology is the how, and that's for the startups to figure out. This stuff on the board is the how. But we need to talk about the what. What is it that we deliver to those companies? That's how you get them across the line, not the how.
Jim, do you want to weigh in on what you think some of the challenges are?
Yeah, here, Naomi, first let me say, pharma's had a long history of successfully developing medicines, but developing digital products is very different. That's why partnering with startups is so important to advancing digital innovation in our industry. But there have been, as you've alluded to, some fundamental differences between pharma and startups that I've recognized. Now, I'll talk about one because I could talk forever, but let's talk about the product development models. I mean, it can take up to 10 years, and I think the number is $2.7 billion to move a drug from discovery to launch. Now, pharma is working to reduce that time, reduce the cost, but it's still a lot of money and a lot of time. So it takes many years to launch something, and even when you have one single path to launch the product, and when you do launch it, you never ever want to change it. So contrast this, especially as you talked about in digital, Naomi, you talk about it being software focused, where you have a software-based product is developed with a minimum viable product or MVP in months, not years. And for a tiny fraction, that MVP is developed for a tiny fraction of that $2.7 billion. And then once it's launched, you want to rapidly and continually iterate. So these wide differences in these models, these development models, lead to differences in decision-making, governance, risk tolerance, and that drives a lot of that gap.
Yeah, I would say just, tying that all together, Jim, that means a very different very different culture, very different orientation and sort of way of doing business, whether you're risk averse, whether you want to move quickly and break things, or whether you want to go slowly and document and be careful at each step. So I think the two organizations are so fundamentally differently oriented.
Right. There's a lot of fundamentals, but I want my other fellow panelists have a chance to chime in.
Jessica?
Yeah, I'll chime in on that one. So, having been chief digital officer at a 150-year-old big life sciences company, also, I completely agree with what you're saying. And it comes down to how the organizations are designed. Big pharma, and actually any pharmaceutical company, is designed to be resistant to change. And if you look at the way the organization is structured and the processes, the magic of a pharma company is that it's able to take a molecule through 10 years of discovery and development and get it into your medicine cabinet. And that doesn't happen if you keep changing things. That has a very clear process that must be followed. And so these organizations have evolved to become somewhat resistant to change. And so a change in the organization must be incredibly deliberate. And then the change must be echoed in the processes to have the continuity. So when you're looking at a big pharma company, it's resistant to change for a reason. And that's because you need that stability to get a medicine to market, to actually help your patients. If you're a startup, to survive, you thrive on change. You're adapting to the needs of the marketplace, to your customers, to your employees. You're evolving and changing as an organization by nature of your age and your stage. The change is necessary for your survival, just as much as the resistance to change is necessary for pharma survival. So when you come at it with these organizations, it really helps to think about what is it that they are structured and designed to protect. Whereas the startup, they're coming in with something new. So how do you bring in something new in a way that mitigates risk, that adds that value that Charles was talking about, and that satisfies the needs of that longitudinal perspective, that long-term view of the pharma company. And it does a lot of times come down to strong relationships. You can jump through all the hoops with procurement, with the tech audits, with the regulatory assessments, but at the end of the day, you do need really strong relationships between your pharma champion and your startup to be able to have that open, clear communication so you both can survive. Otherwise, it's going to break down.
Great. Joel?
Yeah, that's such an interesting perspective. I love that. I'm having this existential moment now after what Jessica just said, how resistant to change. I think that's so true. I would say maybe a couple of things. One is I'm going to stick to your definition of digital health, which is around patients and doctors, because that's a very, very different place than experimenting with AI companies on novel targets. Those transactions, I think, suffer from the typical things that bog down big company, small company, which is a path very well trodden. Your definition of digital health is a very specific thing, Naomi, because there are all kinds of rules and regulations for pharma around this concept of value. And that's sort of why I make that joke to begin with. Any other industry would think about how to provide the most possible value to their customers. We in fact have processes that are in place to make sure we don't do that when it comes to solutions like around the pill, beyond the pill, because those are viewed as trying to drive a certain type of behavior. So how do you create value for your customers when you're specifically forbidden from creating value for your customers? That's something that I think keeps all of us working in innovation inside these pharmaceutical companies awake at night. I've been working on this for 15 years. I don't think I have the answer yet, but we keep trying. And I think it also leads a little bit to maybe two other quick thoughts. One is pharma's still organizing itself here. It's still trying to figure out how to be a good partner here. There are lots and lots of fiefdoms in these large organizations experimenting with these technologies. So that can be really hard in terms of this gap. And then there's also this use case mirage that I sort of think of, which is it's easy to understand a lot of the use cases that we talk about. Wouldn't it be great if patients had access to their medical information? Wouldn't it be great if we could overcome certain transportation issues that relate to getting to an infusion center? But when you move to execute on that, people haven't done that before. And you get into these value sort of swamps that become very difficult for teams internally, mostly marketing teams, to try and navigate and figure out, again, sticking to your definition of digital health. So I think that's partly the gap. It's not for a lack of understanding what the benefit theoretically could be. It's for when you get into the weeds of solving for that, you run into this other quagmire of issues.
Great. Well, I want to sort of take advantage of the diversity of perspectives, of roles, of experience on our panel, and ask each of the panelists to talk a little bit more about what's interesting in digital health, and particularly, as a financial investor, as a strategic investor, as a pharma executive. What are you looking for in a digital health startup? What do you think makes a startup successful, particularly with regard to a pharma relationship? And I hope we're going to hear some different perspectives. Joel, maybe we can start with you.
So if I understand that, it's sort of two parts. I think one is the piece we're really excited and working on right now is this whole area of social determinants of health and health equity. It's a really fascinating thought process in terms of being a stakeholder in this broader healthcare ecosystem, and what is our role as pharma as it relates to trying to solve for some of those issues. So we're investing our venture capital there, we're investing our philanthropic capital there, we're investing, marketing teams are putting lots of energy behind different types of programs to eradicate things like testing deserts, and how do we drive more parts of the population that frankly aren't in the healthcare system at all into screening programs, that kind of thing. So I think that's one area that's very interesting to me right now. I think in terms of advice to the entrepreneur, maybe two or three things. One is don't oversell. There's a lot of hyperbole with the companies we meet. I get that. That's very much my personality. That's not really the personality of a lot of the pharma people you will meet. They're used to clinical research, as Jessica was saying, very structured outcomes processes. So you don't need to oversell. I would just focus on what the thing is that you do really well and help them understand the application to their business. I think two is figure out who the real sponsors are. There's so many competing innovation efforts inside these big pharma companies that you might waste several cycles with teams that don't have budget, they don't have human resources, they don't have senior sponsorship. And then I think maybe the third thing is, one thing we've been doing really well with our alliance management team is, instead of presenting sort of a broad demo or capability to some audience, and everyone's very excited about theoretically everything you could do, try and present your capabilities against a very specific ask from a team. What's a project they're working on? What's a problem they're trying to solve? Present your capabilities in the context of that problem to show them the real application of your technology, not sort of a window dressing, we can do it all type approach.
Great. So you like startups that really focus on meeting a problem and answering a question and delivering clear value. Jessica, tell us a little bit from a strategic investor perspective. What are you looking for in a digital health startup?
So, from a strategic investor view, when I was at Bayer, we were looking for things that would give us a competitive edge in the market. And so strategic investors are a little different than what I am now, an institutional investor.
Exactly.
Where we actually are looking at the returns that can be made on the company. So in both cases, what's critically important is the talent. We see a lot of really compelling, charismatic founders, but they don't truly understand the space or the challenge or the issue. So finding a founder that has come in with that experience from pharma, from personal experience, from previous companies, but they truly understand the customer's pain point and where the friction is. And so they're able to deliver a solution that someone will pay for. Because at the end of the day, all that matters to any of us as investors is there a customer willing to pay for what you're doing? And so, having that clear understanding from being on the other side really helps. So a case in point, I'm on the board of one of our companies called Pluto Health, and Pluto is founded by the former chief data officer at Duke. She really, truly understands the data problem because she saw all the companies coming through the Duke Clinical Research Institute overpromising. And then she actually knew what the problem was, where to solve the friction points. And now, the company's just taken off. And that goes to really what Joel emphasized is do not overpromise. Pharma folks will stay in a pharma career for decades. They may move every 2 or 3 years to get a promotion or move companies, but they have long memories. So if you oversell and overpromise, and if you sell something that you know you can build if you get the contract, be really transparent about that, because the relationships you make in pharma, they don't go away. These people stay in your ecosystem for decades. And if they have a great experience with you, that will follow you for decades. Whereas if they say, oh, they overpromised, it was a disaster, ruined our timelines and our budget, they're going to let someone else in through the procurement pathway and choose the relationship that hasn't destroyed their trust. So really be very thoughtful and deliberate. And if you have to, move as slow as you can to be sustainable, because this is not an industry where you can afford to have any customer experience not be the best that it can.
So Jessica, you mentioned the importance of team, and I think we hear that from most venture capitalists, team. But can you comment a little bit on business models and how you think about those when you're looking at a digital health startup? Because I think that's an area that's very sort of nascent, and digital health startups are, I think, trying to figure out their business models. Can you talk a little bit about what you look for as an investor?
Oh, it's such an evolving space right now. All the startups want help on their pricing models, but if you're truly doing something new in the space, the pricing is really far from being established, and there are no norms yet. So the business models that we see most often in the space, obviously a B2B partnership solution. If you're doing a digitaceutical where there's milestones upfront to pay for the investment, that's very different than if you're doing a license-based model per person whose data is being pulled in. There's a variety of different models, but what you're looking for really has to be grounded in what enables your organization to survive. At the end of the day, we do see some big companies, big retailers, big pharma companies asking startups for business models that'll kill the startup. So you're looking for a model that enables you to be sustainable, but that also gives you those milestones, clear points of achievement that your pharma partner can champion. And I'm going to encourage startups to go a step further. For you to keep a relationship with a pharma company, your internal champion has to be able to evangelize about the work. So in pharma, there are so many internal meetings. It's death by internal meeting. So if you're giving your pharma sponsor or partner already pre-made decks every month, here's what we've achieved, here's what we've accomplished, here's what's different and new, and enabling them to share that within their organization. If you're giving them the success points and packaging up so that they can distribute it within the organization, you're going to really build that momentum and enthusiasm that will enable you to go enterprise-wide from maybe one therapeutic area and one brand to the entire company. But that's an intentional strategy for customer success that you have to prioritize and build into every engagement with that pharma partner.
I love that advice, Jessica. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier about how important relationships are. By supporting your business partner, providing this information, helping prepare them, you're building that relationship and then enabling them to work with all the stakeholders that they have to work with that sometimes the startup never even sees, but yet are so important to the partnership. So Jim, different perspective now. You're neither a strategic nor a financial investor. You're inside a pharma company.
Professionally, I'm an amateur.
Professionally, sorry. We only want to hear your professional opinion right now. What are you looking for in a digital health startup?
So let me break this down in 3 areas. First, I'll call it the technical givens, right? First, we're looking for a solid product or service that's based on data, engineering discipline, or science. Very, very rigorous. We want to see that. And not only do we want to see that, we also want to see that you have, and Jessica, I think, started to talk about this a bit, we want sustainable discipline and process being used to develop and maintain that product or service. And then, we also mentioned earlier, I think Charles mentioned that regulatory pathway, if it's applicable, if you have a product that needs to be cleared or approved, what is your regulatory pathway? Is it achievable in the time frame? Is it a reasonable approach you're taking? Do you have a robust clinical plan? So all those are kind of, I'll call the technical aspects. But a second thing I want to bring up is, especially with a company like Lilly, and we are incredibly relationship driven, incredibly high integrity company. We want a cultural and a purpose fit, right? So Lilly thinks of itself as united, caring with discovery to make medicines that help people around the world. So that's our mission. We want a common mission with the startups of helping make lives better for people. So we look for that. And the other thing too is I run across, and maybe this is more of a advice than really what we're looking for, but it kind of goes hand in hand, as I've seen a lot of startups in different situations. They come to pharma for various reasons, and sometimes pharma is not the best customer. We'll see something that really, why aren't you talking to providers or maybe even payers? And so sometimes what I'm looking for is not just that cultural fit, but is pharma really the right customer? I put that lens on.
Wow, great. I love that, Jim, especially the notion of a cultural fit and sort of shared vision, shared mission. Mm-hmm. So Charles, the question's a little different for you. I want to ask you, what makes a good pharma partner? What are you looking for? Obviously, you want as many clients and you want them to pay, but which customers have been your favorite? No names mentioned, of course, but what has made them good customers, good companies to work with?
The real honest truth is that it's not about the company, it's about the person. You need to find individual people who you can work with that can, from within the pharma company, who have the pulse. So there is this aspect. They do kind of typically need to be high enough up within the organization that what they say matters. So you need to find a person who's high enough up that what they say matters, and that who you get along with and you share a common vision for the project. And if you can find that right champion, that's critical. That's what makes partnerships move forward. That's what gets you outside of this sort of death by pilot situation. That's like, because if you work with a person who maybe they really, really like you, and they really, really like your project, but they're more of a coach than a champion, so they don't have the pull to move it forward. It doesn't matter if they like you, right? The project finishes the pilot and then it's over. So that's 100% about identifying individual people who you can build a relationship with. That's what makes a good pharma partnership.
So obviously, Charles, the clear follow-up is, how do you find these people?
By trial and error. So one thing I think is that you really need to be very comfortable as a startup saying no. And this is hard. You're saying no to customers. So we have this story that we talk about at Unlearn. I don't remember where I read this article, but I read this article at one point about some Girl Scout who had repeatedly won the Girl Scout cookie selling championship. Like every year, Girl Scout cookie selling champion. And somebody asked her, like, what is your secret? And she said, well, I only try to sell cookies to people who want cookies. And I think that's actually a really important lesson. A lot of times the pharma people are asking you for something that's a little bit, or maybe very different from what your product actually is. And you have to decide as a startup, are you pivoting, or do you just say no and you move on to the next person because somebody does want the product that you're selling today? I think sometimes startups will say yes to people and then they're trying to sell something that they don't really have. And then they deliver a bad experience. It takes them a long time. The product doesn't work as well. They should just say no, that's not what we do, and move on. So I think that being able to say no is critical to finding the right people, because somebody will say yes. And once you find those people who are saying yes, now you can start to pattern match and figure out, okay, now I know, the titles or the profiles of people who I'm looking for. But I think you have to go out and talk to people and do that trial and error process. Great.
So we had a question come in from the audience that I think is interesting, and I'll share it with you. And they appreciate very much, we're talking about the importance of partnership. I think there's a question about sort of getting into the details about how these partnerships happen. And I think the question, maybe we'll ask you, Jim, to take it on first, is, how is pharma setting itself up? What kinds of platforms are in place to actually engage with digital health startups? And what types of ways is pharma changing so that it is a better match culturally in terms of being willing to take risk around innovation? As Jessica pointed out, it's not something that pharma doesn't usually change rapidly. So what's sort of happening within pharma companies that are positioning them to be partners, and what platforms and strategy are in place that will help facilitate working with digital health startups?
Well, again, this goes back, every farm is a little bit different, big, small, depending where their stages are on products or their portfolio or pipeline. But, I think pharma, and we've seen this in the past and we see it growing more and more, they're using different tools, right? They will have, like Lilly has a couple incubators now. We plan to open a third, right? So we can work with startups based on that, on those. We have some more, our incubators today are more based on molecules, but they're going to expand into genetic medicine, they're going to expand into digital. And so we can find companies that way. We also will partner with outside firms to help us find the startups, like accelerators, right? We will have partners to help us find partners. But at the same time, and in full disclosure, Lilly is a member of Pharmstars. So I will put that out there right now. But we also are trying to adapt our internal structure. So Lilly has a very, very robust external innovation organization where we search and evaluate and have the right, some people call it a gatekeeping organization, but we also know how to work with the external partners to get things set up, to help them find the right management type of champion inside. And so that's especially important then with these digital health startups that are operating at a faster speed. They're used to it and they need to take the bigger risks. And so we're trying to adapt some of our processes inside to deal with that. I'll see if anybody else wants to add to that.
I will say, Jim, that I think it's great that Lilly has taken such a thoughtful approach, because one of the things that we've heard from digital health startups, and we survey them all the time when they're applying to Pharmstars, is that they feel like a lot of pharma companies are interested in digital health, are out there talking to digital health, but lack their own strategy or belief or understanding around what they actually need and who they should be working with. And that becomes very frustrating to startups, because they get really excited because they get this first meeting, they have a meeting and they realize that it's just kind of an exploratory meeting on the pharma side, and that they actually are going to go back and think some more and try to figure out, what they actually want to work on. So hearing that there are pharma, and I know it's not all pharma, but that are taking really a more thoughtful approach in terms of planning what they want from digital health, I think makes you a much better partner.
Well, the description you gave, Naomi, it brings me back to something I think Joel said earlier, is that who you sell to at pharma, there's a wholly different perspective. And so sometimes these pharmas are so big that if you bring in something like a company that innovates around data, that starts out with clinical trials, but can innovate with data on other parts of the development process, you're going to be at very different parts of the pharma organization. And you may get a lukewarm response from one organization and a very hot response from another organization. So it's going to be up to your gatekeeper to help you find where the best possible fit is.
Yeah, just to add in there, to make some really practical suggestions for our participants. There's so many different groups inside of big pharma. I remember at Bayer, or pick any company here around the table, there's over 100,000 folks, and everybody has a different team with different objectives in their different silo. So we don't even know what's happening in our organizations a lot of times. So you may struggle with saying, all right, do I apply to the innovation group? Do I apply to the external innovation group? Do I apply to the VC investment arm? And in every company, they're going to be a little different. And some of them, some of the accelerators or incubators are more of a PR visibility engagement piece. They don't come with contracts or investments. Some of the investments and some of the pharma companies do come with really nice contracts as a part of the investment. Every company is completely different. So it's difficult to navigate, and it goes back to Charles's point about the personal relationships. You can't just go by the title or the group or the discussion. Now, there are some things you can do to make your life easier once you get a foot in the door. It's really find the advocate inside of a procurement team, or one of the team that's going to be involved no matter what, the legal procurement. Spend a lot of time educating those support functions, because anywhere in the organization, marketing, market access, clinical development, wherever you engage, they're going to need the procurement or the legal or the other support function to engage and give them the go ahead. So the time you spend investing those colleagues is really well spent, because then they understand the difference between you and your competitors. And when you get down to pricing, somewhere months and months down after the audits and the contracting discussions, when you get down to the pricing, they understand the value difference between you and what your customers offer, and you don't lose more time, again, starting back at the beginning. So educating those core functions in the organization that often don't move around as much as some of the more visible functions, those are really strong relationships that have a lasting benefit.
Yeah, no, I
would maybe add one thing to that too, which is I think there are things that you can do as the entrepreneur. One is you can study the pharma company's press releases. Are they talking about digital? Do you see other partnerships that they have participated in? Does their presence go beyond sort of a LinkedIn stream of someone who went to a hackathon for the weekend? What is there something deeper in terms of the way they're talking about their commitment? That's number one. I think number two is something I see in our best portfolio companies when you're at a board meeting and they're talking to you about what's happening in the sales pipeline, which is that they understand their target market very well. And when they go in to see a customer, or they think about segmentation, they know exactly what it is about their solution. And I think, Jessica, you said something along these lines earlier, that's going to solve a pain point for their customer. I've seen pitches from some of the best companies we've interacted with who have come in and really presented their capabilities in a way where they say, here's 3 parts of your business where we think very specifically there's an application for our product. Maybe it's a small incidence of disease and you don't know how to get to that population, so you don't want to run a trial. Or maybe you're trying to draw some kind of equality to a different type of testing mechanism that's out there. But they understand our business. And then the third thing I would say is, when you're meeting with these various different groups, whether it's at a conference like a HIMSS or Vive or Health or in these kinds of forums, ask them how they're organized. Try and find out from the stakeholders that you're talking to, where do they sit in the organization? How does the organization broadly organize itself? And start to explore other connections you probably need to make if you're to build that deeper relationship inside the pharma company. There's a limit to that. We call it fracking when it's sort of dialing for dollars across the organization. So I think you have to be careful, but it is a way you can inform yourself.
I think it's great advice, Joel. I think though it's also pretty hard to do. We see a lot of startups coming to us, I'll tell you, at Pharmstars, because they actually want to learn how are these big organizations, structured. They often seem very opaque, and so our approach is, okay, you need to understand who's on the other side of the table from you. So we'll share with you how pharmas typically organize, what the functions are, how drugs get made, what the internal functions are. And the other piece I think that's also hard for startups, but I think very valuable, is learning to speak pharma, learning actually the language, because there is a different language that's used. And again, if you're trying to communicate, if you're trying to build that relationship, speaking the same language makes it so much easier to connect. I'm curious, you guys have probably seen startups, some startups succeed, some fail. I want to sort of go back a little bit to any other advice that you might have for startups that are hoping to engage pharma. We've talked already about the importance of relationships, of understanding the organization, of focusing on, what you bring and being very clear about that. But any other advice or things that you've seen that just were, big no-nos not to be repeated?
I always think of the famous Jeffrey Moore book, Crossing the Chasm, where, they talk about, I think there's a view amongst startups that a lot of the presentations we see, and I'm sure like other VCs, it feels like thousands a year, and we're thankful for that. But it's always amazing to me that there's this view that we're the first ones who have come up with this idea. And here's the classic sort of Harvey Ball chart where the largest companies in the world don't have these capabilities, but we have them all, right? Whereas if you think about really how hard a lot of this is and how you really want there to be a competitive marketplace out there who's creating awareness and who perhaps you can improve or differentiate yourself versus what's already been done. But I think the best companies we see are the ones who truly have an appreciation for what's been tried before, what the competitive set looks like. And instead of presenting themselves in a light where no one else has ever thought of this concept of being able to deliver a patient their medical records, actually talking about it in a way where they're helping us understand what if you were to build the perfect solution for this, these would be the capabilities. Here's what we happen to have perhaps versus the competition. Here's where your investment would be going to continue to broaden these modes and sort of differentiate your capabilities. And or here's why our solution is really well positioned for your types of therapies, brand teams, whatever it may be. So I guess that's the piece of advice I would give. Don't feel threatened by competition. To me, you're far more impressive in a presentation when you show an understanding of where you sit in the context of the industry, and then focus on the things in your business that really are differentiating and sustainable.
I like that, sort of recognizing the complexity and what's going on in the ecosystem. And Joel, I also hear a little bit being humble and not trying to say that you're the best and the only, but sort of recognizing that maybe you're
building. Has seen all those charts before, many, many times, right?
Jessica, comments?
Yeah, I think I'd add in there the point that, remember what pharma does and doesn't do. So we're not talking about biotechs here. That's a totally different ballgame. But if you look at what pharma does, by and large, they're finding assets. Very few are still developed in-house. They're hiring CROs to manage the studies. They're bringing in the pricing consultants and the big marketing and the big consultancies to support. So knowing exactly what your pharma customer is doing and is not doing is helpful, because in some cases, you'll be just as better off if you explain it to their consultant or to their marketing firm and have them be your partner and liaison, or know if it really is something that, no, you do need to go directly to the pharma company, or maybe it's better you're working with the CRO that's providing it to the company. Really understand what it is that your partner is doing and where you fit in. And maybe you fit in better on the clinical trial side. Maybe you fit in better working with their CRO. And that's good for you too, because once you pass those audits, you have a wider range of studies you can participate in across other companies. Or maybe you're better off working with their pricing, market access data consultancy. So really understand what it is your customer does, and if they're doing it themselves, or if you're better off working with one of their partners.
Great. Yeah. So understanding the whole ecosystem and where there might be other points that you can deliver value. Terrific. Jim, what are your thoughts?
I'm gonna jump to a point where the initial contract's been signed and now you're starting the relationship. All right, I'll take that perspective. And my advice to startups and to pharma for that matter is recognize and embrace the differences between pharma and startups. So much like we look at diversity amongst individuals and recognize what everyone brings to the table, we got to do that at an organizational level as well, right? So both pharma and startups have important roles to play when it comes to developing innovative solutions, especially with digital. Startups bring that enhanced agility, applications of new digital technology, and a different, but still healthy perspective on risk than what pharma has. But pharma has the structure, the history, and the resources to bring clinical rigor to a collaboration, including established quality systems and a very deep understanding of our medicines. So it's the combination of these capabilities from both of the companies that's going to drive the value and success in the collaboration.
I think that's why we think it's a match made in heaven, if you can get all of those resources and strengths into one arrangement. Great. Charles?
So just remember, the question is, do I have any final pieces of advice for?
Yeah, or where you've seen things work, what succeeded, what hasn't, and just advice for startups. I guess if you had advice for pharma, you could give it also.
Yeah, I
but
think
we've
it's a
heard that they
generic-
don't change that much.
I think it's a generic problem. We talked about this. It's been mentioned a few times about language differences. I think that this is a tricky area right now within digital health, within a bunch of things. So like within our area, we see this very immediately, that there's a lot of vague language that no one really knows what any of it means. So you had people, for example, running what they used to call virtual clinical trials, but there was nothing virtual about them. So now they've changed the name to decentralized clinical trial, right? Because there's nothing virtual at all. And now you have things like synthetic control arms, but there's nothing synthetic about a synthetic control arm at all. It is just data. And especially when in computer science, we use synthetic data as a term, and that is not what is used within synthetic control arms. It's real data, right? So you have these issues of like, even within us, like we work on a specific type of machine learning model that people call an RBM. And RBM means something really specifically within clinical trials, right? So you have these issues of these merging of communities. And a lot of times there's frankly just misunderstandings of people on one side talking about one thing and people on the other side not knowing that. So I think that as a startup, the key thing is that you have to take it upon yourself. It's your responsibility to be understood. It's not your audience's responsibility to understand you. It's your responsibility to be understood. So you just have to really, really work hard over and over and over again to actually figure out how to describe what you're doing in a way that resonates with the audience. And that takes a lot of work. But if you don't do that, then you're never going to get your foot in the door.
Great. Well, we have less than 5 minutes left on the panel. I wanted to just maybe do sort of a lightning round and ask everyone for a prediction about where we're going to be in the coming years. And you can predict something in the near term or the long term. And so maybe Charles, we'll start with you.
Sure. Okay. So my big prediction for this is a little bit of a longer term, for let's say maybe 10, 20 years. I don't think that the big pharma companies will necessarily still be the big pharma companies. I think that we're going to have some new companies come out that end up disrupting the space. That would be my prediction in 10 to 20 years. I think there is an innovator's dilemma that's going on, and that there's some new interesting computation-driven drug companies that I think are going to be successful, and that they will end up kind of becoming the big pharma companies of the next few decades.
Terrific.
That's a bold prediction.
It's a bold prediction. Well, we'll look for Unlearn.AI.pharma.
Well, we're an enabler. We'll enable everybody, big pharma, small pharma. We don't make drugs ourselves, but I think there are other companies who do, and I think they will become the big pharma. Yeah.
Great. Jessica, prediction?
Yeah, I think we'll get better at diversity in our studies and our patient population. So the recent FDA guidance that is encouraging a more diverse population in studies is really important. We've been waiting for that for decades. And because of that, now we are factoring in, 300 different SDOH factors to better understand where people are at. And if they're in a food desert where there's no grocery stores nearby, we can have food delivered. Or if they're in a place where the nearest clinic is a couple hours away, we can send home support to them. So we are starting to look at that incorporation of data in a more meaningful way to actually meet people where they're at. And because pharma is so slow moving, I'll say just getting that right in the next 10 years will be a very big accomplishment.
Terrific. Joel?
Yeah, I think, and I guess I hope that we see the evolution of what a clinical endpoint means to really focus on our ability to control for multiple variables associated with disease, not just the interaction of whatever the chemical or biological entity is. And to the degree someone figures that out, I think it's a massive green field for pharma to differentiate itself as an industry and as a provider of services. So if someday in the future you get a script to a product which includes a nutrition plan and mobile infusion therapies and the ability to talk to a coach plus a drug, which is what we've all been talking about for 20 years and still doesn't exist, what does that foretell for an industry of this size when we figure out how to do that? So I guess, I don't know if that's a prediction or lamenting, a lack of getting there by this point already, but that to me just seems like an enormous opportunity that has to be solved for.
Brilliant. Jim?
I think I'm going to sidle up next to Charles on this a bit, right? Where his bold prediction. I'll go a little bit more specific. I think pharma is going to adopt and adapt some digital tools for clinical development. They're going to adapt some clinical tools for commercial use. But I don't think pharma is going to really be your champion of pure digital therapeutics any more than in the 50s and 60s, the big three automakers jumped into the airplane making business as commercial aviation took off. I think you will see new industries arise, namely in digital therapeutics, but molecules will continue. Digital therapeutics will not replace all molecules.
Great. Wow. Well, some awesome and bold predictions. I want to once again, thank you all, wonderful panelists, Joel, Jim, Charles, Jessica, for your time today. I think your insights were terrific. You are all clearly on the front line, helping facilitate the closing of the pharma startup gap, bringing together pharma, recognizing where there's great opportunity with digital health startups. I want to thank the audience for joining us today. I want to thank MedCity for putting together this panel discussion. And I want to wish all of you the best and looking forward to a bright future for digital health and pharma and a match made in heaven.
Thank you so much, Naomi.
Everyone.
And
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naomi, and the panel. This was great. I can't help but ask a question of Jessica, and Joel, if he's feeling bold, he might answer as well. So a few years ago, pharma was creating this CDO, the Chief Digital Officer position, right? And then we've lost a few of them to consumer. Merck's Chief Digital Officer left, so did Novartis. So Jessica, why couldn't Bayer hold on to you?
So I'm very clearly on the record as saying I think a chief digital officer role is a transformational role, not a permanent role. And different organizations have different philosophies, but I think the role of the CDO is to come in and enable the organization to become more digital, but you're not replacing the chief technology officer or the chief marketing officer or the chief executive officer. So I see it as a transformational role. And so to that end, some organizations will have them longer than others, depending on the transition and how they think of it from their board perspective. We know digital will always be necessary, but it depends on the organization if they truly need a CDO longer than a few years to do that investment, that very heavy cleanup and integration that's needed, and then to put the organization on a solid path forward. And just very briefly, I also think of it in a way of, because it's an internal transformation, a change management, it helps to bring someone that understands the organization. So a number of companies have brought in amazing talent from outside healthcare. But if you think of it like putting a pacemaker into someone's heart, you don't bring in a techie to implant a pacemaker. The cardiologist implants it because it's a living organism and the technology isn't able to make it work better and faster. But you really have to understand that whole living organ and organism. It's not just the tech, it's the integration. So I think that's another place where maybe we didn't think through some of the talent that we were bringing in.
I think that's a great answer, because some of the people who left went right back into consumer space. Joel, do you want to chime in?
For setting this up. Yeah. Can you hear me? Did I go to mute?
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah.
This will be my last panel ever after I answer this question, but I think I would say a couple things. I think one is the most successful organizations I see is where the digital question is not treated as an adjacency. It is absolutely central to the strategy of the organization. So these processes are becoming more digital, whether it's trials, discovery, the way we interact with our patients. And when some level of organization, which I would call a chief digital officer, arrives to sort of organize those efforts, understanding that a lot of the innovation has to stay local. The business unit leaders want it to be local. They want to be viewed as innovative. So I think the real magic of a CDO, at least in my perspective in pharma, is someone who, many of the things I think you just said, Jessica, I totally agree with, but who really understands that there's sort of a basket of services they have to offer the organization. Some groups may need a lot of help with strategy. Some groups may be very evolved on strategy and need help with budgets or need help fighting regulatory and legal battles. So it's not one size fits all because so many of the parts of the organization are trying to innovate. And when you find somebody who understands the pharmaceutical organism and then can offer up the right mix of those services to the different groups locally, I think that's the magic. And I'm not sure most have figured that out just yet.
Perfect. Well played, all of you. This was such an interesting panel, and I hope you guys had as much fun as I did listening to you.